Among all of the Targaryen history that we have so far, there is one era that stands out as something of particular interest to me. The ascension, politics, true public service, and personal relationships of Jaehaerys Targaryen all lead his reign and his era to be my favorite, and I'm here to talk a little bit more about why. Hi, if you're new, my name is Kayla. Welcome to my channel, or welcome back if you're returning. I like to talk about books, book reviews, A Song of Ice and Fire. If that interests you, then please subscribe and let's get into my video today. So before we get right into Jaehaerys and why I particularly love this era of Targaryen history, I want to talk a little bit about the Targaryen family and just give that little bit of background for those who maybe haven't read Fire and Blood or aren't really sure, or even if you have, I just need to set it up a little bit for myself for it to all be cohesive. The Targaryen house and bloodline comes from Valyria, which I'm sure you've heard even if you've only watched the show. They were one of many dragon houses and families, and the long history with dragons is ever present even after the Targaryens no longer have dragons of their own, as many of their customs are still rooted in the relationship with dragons. A few of these include burial by cremation. When a dragon was available, the pyre was typically lit by the dragon itself, placing a dragon egg in the newborn baby's cradle. Again, even after they stopped having actual dragons, they would still put dragon eggs in, kind of in hopes, or if they had access to one, like even a petrified one. And then of course, high heat tolerance. Although this trait appears to vary pretty widely between the individual Targaryen, but of course it is still part of their history and relationship with dragons. As far as traits, there is a physical appearance that is really common of Valyria, with golden or like a silvery platinum hair and super piercing blue or purple eyes that can range from pretty light to pretty dark. Other traits include the custom of marrying brother to sister, cousin to cousin, as well as an almost like sixth sense, where many Targaryens have almost premonition-like dreams that often have helped guide their house in many ways, including leaving Valyria, actually. Perhaps most famously, there is a madness that also runs through Targaryen blood and seems to crop up as a result of the intermarrying and the inbreeding. So that's just something to keep in mind. I think there's that kind of famous quote from both the books and the show that every time a Targaryen is born, it's like the flip of a coin, because you don't really know what you're gonna get. So, circling back to premonitions that Targaryens are prone to, I want to give a brief background into the Targaryen arrival in Westeros, including of course like Aegon's conquest, but even before that. As mentioned, this Targaryen ability to sometimes envision the future allowed the Targaryen house to actually sell their holdings and leave Valyria before the doom and bloodshed that followed. So they actually settled at this point on Dragonstone in the Blackwater Bay, and the entirety of Valyria subsequently collapsed and all of the dragon riders with it. So while they were kind of nothing special in Valyria, after this, of course, they were like the only surviving house with dragons and dragon riders, which kind of helped to build up their power. And then of course, Dragonstone being kind of their stronghold. About a century later, young Aegon Targaryen and his dragon Balerion set out to fulfill his dream of uniting the seven kingdoms of Westeros and presiding as ruler. Aided by his two sister wives, Rhaenys and Visenya, as well as their dragons, he was successful in uniting the kingdoms except for Dorne, which famously did not bend the knee. While he was generally considered a good ruler by many, this felt uncomfortable for a lot of people in Westeros, as the Targaryens considered themselves different from typical man. They felt that they did not have to follow the same rules and laws of the Faith of the Seven, so the same customs that everybody else held kind of sacred. They did not feel they had to follow. While they were followers of the religion itself, they broke both rules about incestuous marriage and about, of course, polygamous marriage. And Aegon, he broke both of those. Yeah, that was kind of frowned upon, so while generally he was pretty well accepted, this is kind of a point of contention between the Faith of the Seven and the House of Targaryen, and it's a little bit of an ongoing thing, as if you look into the history you will see. Now, I'm not going to get into the weeds of the entire conquest and every detail, but it is a fascinating story, and I do highly recommend, if you haven't, reading Fire and Blood. I mean, if you feel so inclined, because it is actually really fascinating, not as dry or confusing as I thought it would be. So yeah, I would highly recommend it. I'm not going to get into every detail in this, but just kind of an overview. Basically, I just want to establish the background for the family tree and some of the dynamics at play. Kind of going back to the family tree and how some of the characters relate. So Aegon the Conqueror, as mentioned, was married to both of his sisters and actually had a child by both as well. So his son with Visenya was called Maegor, later known as Maegor the Cruel, and his son with Rhaenys was called Aenys. Aenys and his wife of the House Valerian went on to have 6 children between them, which sparked a large dispute over succession eventually. Aenys was the firstborn son of Aegon the Conqueror, and when his reign passed to his eldest son Aegon, Aenys's younger brother Maegor usurped the throne. This is another thing that I'm mentioning, but I will not be covering in depth in this video, but eventually the throne ended up passing to Jaehaerys, third son of Aenys, who was actually married to his sister Alysanne. Jaehaerys and Alysanne are actually grandparents to Rhaenys and great-grandparents to Rhaenyra Targaryen. So if you've seen the House of the Dragon show, that's how they relate to those characters, and that's how they relate to kind of the era of the Dance of the Dragons. It's a little bit before this time. This ties in when Jaehaerys loses his first son, Aemon, Rhaenys' father, then names his second son Balon as heir, actually passing over Rhaenys. And the throne eventually passes to Balon's son Viserys. And if, again, you remember House of the Dragon or the Dance of the Dragons, Viserys is Rhaenyra's father. So that's how it all kind of interrelates. I won't go through the whole family tree again, but want to paint a picture of how Jaehaerys relates to other Targaryens and how far away this timeline is from something like the Dance of the Dragons or the conquest of Aegon. This brings me to my favorite era of Targaryen history, the reign of King Jaehaerys the Conciliator and his sister wife Alysanne. So Jaehaerys had kind of an interesting journey to the throne, as you got a peek of just now. As the third-born son, he was really not expected to be the one that would sit the throne or be in this position, so he wasn't really trained or prepared for it in the same way as his 2 older brothers were. I actually believe this ultimately lent itself well to his long reign, and perhaps was why he seemed so level-headed in many ways. And again, he had like a pretty stable marriage relationship. I think again this is why he wasn't quite marrying with the thought that he would sit the throne. He was marrying for actually like love and compatibility with his sister. Of course, it cannot be neglected the positive influence of his wife Alysanne. In this way, they were just true partners in kind of every sense of the word. And a little bit later in life, they had a lot of troubles and turmoil that they went through, but they were true partners. One of the best examples early on of the type of leader that Jaehaerys would become was after ascending the throne, Jaehaerys actually pardoned many of Maegor the Cruel's supporters, with just a few exceptions, of course. But this at the time was a really clever move, as it actually encouraged many people to more willingly support him, seeing that he was maybe a little bit level-headed and had a little bit of reason and was not here to just be cruel and scary. So I think that this balanced approach, especially as such a young leader, really set him up for the type of reign that he would have, his long reign. And I just think it also set people up for some of the expectations as to what type of a leader he would be. Another clever move early in his reign was being proactive about the problem with his marriage. So again, mentioning back to the Faith of the Seven, the kingdoms had shown that there was unrest surrounding the incestuous marriages of the family. And so anticipating this backlash, he basically put out like a positive PR campaign, is the best way I can explain it, where he had like these religious speakers basically going around the kingdoms preaching about how they're like exceptions to this rule. And like, I don't know, it's just kind of funny to me, but he basically had like a proactive PR campaign to kind of get ahead of the marriage and show that in many ways they felt like they were exceptions, and like for whatever reason it seemed to kind of help, and people were much more accepting of this marriage despite the fact that it was still a marriage of incest. So that's just another way in which I feel like he was very clever, very proactive, very level-headed. Jaehaerys and Alysanne produced actually many heirs, like so many heirs that it was wild. I think it was like 13 births in total, so that's a lot of kids. Of course, with this came its own complications, as was a part of the time. Several died young, and there were disconnects and kind of falling out with a few others, such as their daughter who ran away and their one son who just like they didn't vibe with, I guess, so he like went to the Citadel. I don't know. Only 9 of these children actually survived into adulthood, and I mean that's still a lot of heirs, but actually not that many even survived Jaehaerys, so still way more passed away in their adult years. And at the end of it all, only 2 children were actually surviving Jaehaerys, so, and they were both essentially estranged. So it's pretty wild to think that they had that many heirs and then just such a tragic end. I feel like that's very Targaryen. Among the biggest accomplishments of Jaehaerys was the construction of numerous proper roads to unite the realm and connect the kingdoms even more. Largest among these was the King's Road, leading of course to King's Landing. Not only was this obviously extremely beneficial for trade, in many ways it symbolizes his general character as a ruler and his aim to unify the kingdoms. He was really a unifier, really wanted to bring the kingdoms together, and was very successful with this. His reign was long, stable, prosperous, and in many ways it represents the best of what Targaryen dynasty could accomplish. Perhaps the thing I like the most about Jaehaerys and Alysanne is how they would frequently go on royal like processions around the kingdoms, visiting lords and small folk alike to get a sense of how the realm was doing and what types of things were actually needed of them. And I think this is where Jaehaerys was so pragmatic and also understood just the public service aspect of being a ruler. Alysanne in particular took to the needs of women in the kingdoms, holding her women's councils with women, both noble and otherwise. These were gatherings to see what problems and insight women specifically had, and I think that that's so cool. Obviously, like during such a time as this, I think even women in positions of status were very rarely listened to or taken very seriously. She even met with women who worked in Molestown brothels when she visited the Wall, which I think is just so friggin' cool, and it just goes to show that they really didn't think that there were, well, they had this idea of what Targaryen meant, which was like a little bit greater than man. They really didn't think that just because someone worked in a brothel, their opinion wasn't worth listening to. And I think that's fantastic. Honestly, we love Alysanne. Like, how could you not love her? But yeah, I just feel like a lot of these are really indicative of clearly the type of rulers and leaders they were and the way that they viewed the realm and the 7 kingdoms as something to unite, something to have prosper. And I just really like that. I mean, there are so many fascinating parts of Targaryen history, but personally, I found this to be my favorite to read about for so many reasons. The foremost being that Jaehaerys just simply represents so much of what a good ruler can be and so much of what a Targaryen could do. I think bringing it back to A Song of Ice and Fire, in many ways we may see Dany toe the line between these qualities and those of her father, who obviously was known as the Mad King. So it serves as a beacon of what a great Targaryen ruler can accomplish. And yeah, I would just love to hear below what you feel I should have included and what parts of Targaryen history you are particularly interested in. But I kind of just wanted to talk about this a little bit because it's something that's been interesting to me and been kind of on my mind, and I just love Jaehaerys and Alysanne. But yeah, let me know below, what's your favorite part of Targaryen history? What do you think I should have included? I'm thinking I might do more little parts of videos like this because I think it's kind of fun to look back and dissect on. So if you liked it, please like, please subscribe, and I will see you later. Bye!